Continuing with topic 6 of paper 3, covering futures trading and settlement, we'll now look at section 3 on clearing and margin. Now, we have settlement counterparties. Remember, we've got the clearing participant for the buyer, clearing participant for the seller, and they operate around DCAS, Derivatives Clearing and Settlement System. And the central clearing counterparty, which is the clearing house, will buy from the seller and sell to the buyer. And that process is known as novation. Now, the clearing participants are able to effect closeout transactions, as I said, through their DCAS terminals. The clearing house will calculate margin, variation, adjustment, and trading fees at the end of each trading day, and we will be looking at those in a moment. Now, if a clearing participant doesn't have sufficient cash or collateral on deposit with the clearinghouse, then there will be a direct debit to the participant's bank account. The clearing participant's margin deposits that they have to put forward must be in the form of cash, exchange fund bills, notes issued by the Hong Kong government, or US government treasury bills or notes. So this is where the clearing participants must deposit margin with the clearing house, and that's the forms that they are allowed. Now, if we have default, moving on to 3.2, the clearing house has got contingency plans if a clearing participant defaults on its obligations. And what are those plans? First of all, they can close out, settle and or sell all of the contracts registered in that clearing participant's name, suspend the clearer's participantship so they cannot continue, realize deposited non-cash collateral, sell it off and apply the cash proceeds to the amounts due to the clearinghouse, and execute a buy-in or borrowing the underlying asset for delivery to the participant. Now, if the defaulting clearinghouse participant's obligation cannot be settled after all those actions, then the clearinghouse has access to its reserve fund, which clearing participants will have contributed to when they first gained their participantship. And the proceeds from the reserve fund can be used to settle outstanding amounts. Although it doesn't say it, the last port of call is insurance. They can claim on an insurance policy. We're told under no circumstances will customer segregated margin deposits held by the clearinghouse for a clearing participant be used to cover either a house or customer default of another participant. And I'd almost say that's obvious. You can't use one deposit for another participant's default. Margin requirements. The clearinghouse determines the level of margin required from each clearing participant on its open positions using a risk-based algorithm. We're going to go into that in a lot of detail, but I would be wary about getting bogged down in it. The clearinghouse has the right to increase the amount of margin to be paid by the participant at any time. And this margin is good faith deposit to cover potential losses on futures positions, because the settlement doesn't come until you close out the position. So the clearinghouse is holding margin to cover any potential losses. Now, top page 6.12, the client's minimum margin. So this is the end client. The futures exchange sets minimum margin requirements that are required to be collected by each participant. But the participant can ask for a higher margin from client if they consider risk is involved. No futures exchange participant may deal for a client until client has posted the minimum margin. For established clients, there's a little bit of leeway. There are exceptions where a call for minimum margin must be issued by close of business for a new transaction, and then minimum margin is due no later than the next business day. This is for established clients. New positions are not established until overdue minimum margins are settled. You can't let the outstanding margin just not be collected. And the futures exchange participants may demand higher levels of margin from the clients to protect against potential losses. And that's what I was alluding to earlier with the idea of clients that may be deemed higher risk. Now, variation adjustments. This is where the underlying margin is no longer enough to cover, or rather it reduces the equity, reduces because of loss-making positions. And these are these variation adjustments. Marking to market, that's where you mark the position to market prices. Assesses the unrealized profit or loss per contract as if it were realized on a daily basis. So if you're losing money on a daily basis, this is being recognized by these variation adjustments. At the end of each business day, Clearinghouse calculates each participant's liabilities, such as margin trading fees, variation adjustment, paying or collecting cash from each participant as appropriate. And that's just the margining mechanism. For cash collateral, check received in good faith may be treated as cash if there's no reason to suspect it will not be honoured. This is a lot of detail now that doesn't necessarily get examined. Clients' variation adjustment requirements. So the futures exchange participant must also collect mark-to-market margins from their clients on a daily basis, with the profits or losses transferred from or to the participant's collateral account. If losses take the account, here we go. If losses take the account equity below the minimum, that's the maintenance margin level, the client will receive a margin call and will have to contribute funds to take the account back to the minimum or initial margin level. The big picture is that when you enter into futures trade, you will have to post initial margin, which is ultimately calculated by the futures exchange through your broker and the broker to the participant. If you go below, if your equity position falls below the maintenance margin level, you'll get a margin call and you've got to pay more money in to take you back to the initial margin level. That's the mechanism you should be aware of. Futures exchange participants must notify futures exchange if any client fails to meet 2 or more successive margin calls, so this is not good news, or demands for variation adjustment which in aggregate exceed 150,000 Hong Kong dollars. So this is really all the detailed control mechanisms to make sure that losses do not accumulate. The holiday margin requirements, well, that's when Hong Kong's on holiday and other markets are operating, then you may wish to temporarily increase margin requirements to cover potential losses over the period when Hong Kong is closed and other markets are open. Now, system for calculating of margin. Well, it's there. It exists. Please read through the detail, but we haven't seen this amount of detail examined for some time. The vast majority of candidates for paper 3, this is just another language. If you're into the calculation of risk margining systems, etc., this may be familiar. Please read through it. There may be a question or two on it, but I wouldn't sweat it at all. Top of page 6.14, though, the second bullet point is vital because this often gets examined, and it reads, top of page 6.14, by ensuring that all open positions are marked to market, the system does not allow losses to accumulate. That's the point of all of this, is that you putting good faith deposit forward, they're marking to market each day, and if your position is losing money and you go below the maintenance margin level, you must go back to the initial margin level, and that ensures that losses do not accumulate. Please remember that, often examined. 3.7, collection of collateral by the clearinghouse. We're told that the clearing parties can use different classes of collateral to cover the margin liabilities. The order of priority, cash in the settlement currency, we've seen this before, cash in other currency approved by the clearinghouse, and non-cash collateral maintained in the clearing participant's account. Non-cash collateral, now we're repeating ourselves, can include exchange fund bills or notes, that's Hong Kong exchange fund bills or notes, or US government treasury bills or notes. As I said, that was covered previously. An accommodation charge may be levied by the clearinghouse when marginal liability is covered by non-cash collateral, so just accommodating the fact that they're taking it on board. Any unauthorized pledging of securities belonging to the futures exchange participants' clients must be reported by Hong Kong Exchange to SFC. That detail does not get examined. Then we have mandatory intraday variation adjustment and margin, where they must mark to market on a regular basis each day. There's 3.9 additional margin intra-day variation adjustments, and that occurs where the market is particularly volatile, and you can get more than one mark to market, more than one calculation of variation adjustment during the day. And as I say, that tends to be when the market is particularly volatile. They give us some indication, and at the bottom of page 6.14, we're told the guideline is when the applicable margin has been eroded by approximately 25%. Coming to the end of topic 6, section on settlement. Now, the vast majority of futures contracts are cash settled. What does that mean? It means that you enter into a futures contract. For example, you buy a futures and then sometime later you sell the same future. It is a reversing trade. You close out your position and it is cash settled. However, you can get physical delivery contracts where they are settled by the delivery of the underlying commodity. Oil, for example, you buy oil futures and then you take delivery of barrels of oil. It's unusual, but it can happen. And the other side of the trade is payment of cash. For physical delivery, the delivering sellers are matched with receiving buyers through an assignment process. Now, if you fail to comply with the delivery or payment obligations, what can happen? Well, the clearinghouse reserves the right to impose a penalty on the defaulting participant, execute a buy-in to purchase required quantity of the commodity instrument, and then obviously charge the defaulting party, borrow the required quantity from the defaulting seller, borrow the required amount of currency to allow the defaulting buyer to settle. If you are a defaulting clearinghouse participant, you've got to indemnify the clearinghouse, futures exchange, Hong Kong Exchange against all cost fees. In other words, you've got to pay them if you're defaulting. You've got to pay any costs that these parties incur. Finally, exchange of futures occurs where the two parties decide off exchange to settle. So one party will deliver the goods, the others will pay. When that happens, and it's referred to as exchange of futures, you must inform the clearinghouse, and the clearinghouse, if it accepts the request, will just close out the two open positions. That completes topic 6. Now, I reckon about 8 questions, and as you will have picked up, it's highly technical material. There is some very, very common areas of examination, the participantship, the continuing obligations, etc. The more technical material with margin calculations, I wouldn't be too concerned about. But this is a classic topic where you should be reading the material and then doing the practice questions, which will help you recognize the material and recognize the options that are indeed correct. And as ever, you should go to Examinator.online for those practice questions.